when you read Douglas Copeland, right, in the Generation X, there he actually reflects on this very, very interestingly, and he says, well, maybe the time of the Vietnam War, there were ugly times, but it was the last, or maybe the only times of a real history we had. With the 60s movement, you could still see this sense of history moving through us. It's very interesting that the Woodstock generation had this sense of creating history, creating it together with sound. I mean, you know, this is already points to what I want to get at with resonance, being connected through music. And I don't think, and I think it's not accident or chance that they had this, that they invented something like progressive music. Listening to the Future is a book title by Bill Martin, right? And I think even with the fall of the wall, people had this idea. I mean, there was talk of the end of history, right? So the idea, the sense was maybe history is running out, but it's still there. And the fall of the wall is a kind of historical, maybe the last historical breath, so to speak, because afterwards the world would become more democratic, for example, hopefully more peaceful, and the idea of something like the welfare state was in place. I often think about it or talk to my students. I find one very interesting point here. In 1990, when the wall came down, and then when the wall came down and the communist states collapsed, young people were convinced that the future or maybe the extended presence would be democratic, right? For example, right? So of course we knew there was torture in the world, and there was a thing like piracy in the world, but we thought that this is somehow anachronistic. It's still there, but in the end it would go away. And the idea was there is democracy, and we knew not all places were democratic, but the idea was eventually everyone would be democratic. When you now talk to young people, you really get the answer that a thing like torture might come and go, right? So there are some places where there is torture, some places where there is no torture, sometimes when there is piracy, sometimes when there is no piracy. So there's no longer a sense of a phenomenon like torture or piracy belonging to an epoch. Young people don't believe that the world will become more democratic. Obviously not. And now even pupils, I made that test really, high school students come to you and tell you, well, maybe it's a cycle. People kind of, they have a tyrant, let's say, they try to get rid of him, and then they develop a new form, maybe democracy, right, which might have a good time, but then they get tired of it, it degenerates into a kind of mass-driven craziness. And then they might ask for a kind of oligarchic system and this is a very old, antique idea, right? So I really think you can see from Vietnam over the Berlin Wall to the present a kind of, yes, we lose the sense of history moving somewhere. Now is the feeling there are some places which are democratic, there are some places which are not. There are some places which become democratic, there are some places which lose democracy. And it's true for all the other phenomena. Some places which discover human rights, some places which lose it. And I think in a certain sense history has come to an end. The history which moves forward, right, where you can really say, well, this is the future and that was the past. I think this has really come to an end, right? This sense of, maybe even the sense of there being one history. It's a strange thing that history has become a singular, right? The history. There are only stories in the world. So I think we've actually moved back to a point where there are stories. Stories of rise and decay of nations or empires or democracy.